What influenced me most was the realization that data tells the truth even when opinions don't. And now we have finally the tools to listen. And that's what AI is providing to us. I didn't get into data because it was fashionable. I got into data because it was fundamental.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Tyfone.
Thank you so much for listening to and watching the Digital Banking Podcast. If you enjoy our episodes, please follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. And if you're willing, we would love if you'd take a minute to write us a review. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey that is the Digital Banking Podcast. One thing you'll never hear on this podcast, sales pitches. Except this one, Java for Kids coffee. Every bag purchased sends $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals. So now, your morning or afternoon cup can make a real difference. Check out javaforkids.org for more. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Parijat Banerjee, the Financial Services Global Business Head for LatentView Analytics. There seems to be a common trend in guests I have on the podcast who work around big, fast-moving tech, that while they work in and love tech, they crave human connection more than anything. And when I asked Parijat what was important to him, he immediately responded with giving other humans the gift of his full and undivided attention. He said, we live in a world that's so hyper-focused on multitasking that oftentimes we lose sight of the listening part of connecting with people. But seriously, how many times do we do that? Too often, whether it's in work or in our personal lives. And many times in our professional lives, that leads to trying to offer a solution before we've really heard the problem explained fully. Now, listening leads to solutioning, and that's the special sauce. As a diehard soccer fan and player, Parijat said, in soccer, you're taught to be highly in tune with where the ball is and attentive when it comes to you, being hyper-present and focused, and that the team must play together as a cohesive unit. As a society, we've also moved away from doing things together. We may be together, but we aren't together. You know what I mean? So how does this translate to the topics at hand today? Well, spoiler alert, this is yet another episode on AI and other things, but from the perspective of how can AI and modern tech actually help us be more present, more in tune, and more together. So with that, Parijat, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Josh. Really loving to be here with you today.
You know, it's funny. I'm just going to call it out super bluntly. We've been doing this podcast long enough now. It's pretty cool. It's a weird, humbling honor, but now I get an influx of people and PR firms and marketing teams that reach out and want to pitch guests to us. I don't know what the percentage of guests I actually take from people reaching out cold is. But I remember when your PR firm reached out to me and sent it over, and I was like, I don't know, another guest on AI and not necessarily working directly in a credit union or a community bank. Like, is this really here? I don't really remember what it was, but something in the email stuck out to me, and I was like, it might be worth a 15-minute chat with Parijat, and we'll see where this goes. And I'll probably just be really nice and be like, hey, I don't think this is a great fit. And about 5 minutes in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I can't wait to talk to you. I would love to have you as a guest. And I think it was just because we've had so many conversations about AI lately, but I thought you had a really interesting perspective of what got us to this point. And you just said a couple of things that I think are going to be really, really valuable insights for our listeners. So I'm really, really thankful for this kind of happenstance meeting and the opportunity to have you on as a guest. You know, I want to start with something that you said on the discovery call. that really stuck with me. And I want to use this as almost a guiding theme for a little bit of our conversation today. I kind of alluded to this in your introduction. It's something that people who've heard me talk about AI have hopefully heard from me too, is that I'm a big fan of it. I think there's a lot of things that we can do with it. There's a lot of operational efficiencies that can come out of it. But more than anything, if it can help us to be more present because we're better informed, we're more efficient with mundane tasks and things like that, then it frees us up for me to actually look you in the eyes and have a conversation with you and just be paying attention. And it's simple, silly little things like just having my AI note taker run in the background. That happened when we did our discovery call. You and I just talked and I didn't take a single note. My AI note taker took it all. And then I went back and I edited it and was like, hey, these are things that I remember that I wanted to call out. It just lets you be more present. I'm curious, when I was asking you about yourself, you kind of brought that up too. And you were saying, hey, I feel like we're in a world today where everybody's multitasking, everybody's trying to jump to a solution without actually listening. And you were like, no, you were missing something. Like the special trait, the special secret sauce is actually just listening. And that's a superhuman trait, right?
I think you're spot on, Josh. And again, you framed it very well. I personally think attention is the greatest gift that any human can give to the other and vice versa. But before I get into AI, I think we should talk a bit about the base, which is data. Now, I started working in data back when it wasn't sexy, right? When AI lived mostly in research labs and old list programs. And telling someone you worked in analytics earned you puzzled looks, right? It didn't give you LinkedIn comments. Now, my motivation came from sheer curiosity, right? And the belief that data could answer questions we hadn't even learned to ask yet. Now, in the 70s and 80s, AI meant symbolic reasoning. You had expert systems, you had list code running. And by the way, AI is as back as the 70s and even before, right? It's just in 4 today because of ChatGPT. But by the 90s, we saw SQL databases, there were OLAP cubes, SAS, SPSS, a bunch of different things that were playing in. But we were still fighting for storage space. Misers, we were hoarding floppy disks. I don't know if you remember or you've even seen one. But then in the 2000s, something happened, right? Storage got dirt cheap. The internet made this data floodgates burst open, and you had tools like Python and Hadoop and R and others that came into play. And fast forward today, you have these multiple cloud platforms, and you've heard of GPUs from NVIDIA and machine learning frameworks like TensorFlow and others that have turned AI into a real-time business engine. Now, I've stayed in this field because I've seen it evolve from painstakingly coding rules by hand to systems that started learning patterns on their own. The right example of you being when we were chatting and your note taker was taking notes, right? It's like watching this shy student in a back row grow up to become a TED Talk speaker, right? And what influenced me most was the realization that data tells the truth even when opinions don't. And now we have finally the tools to listen. And that's what AI is providing to us. So if I'm being honest, I didn't get into data because it was fashionable. I got into data because it was fundamental. And I'm very happy it played out that way. And now that AI and data science, and these are all the front page news, I feel lucky to have had the front row seat to the show, all the way from Lisp to large language models that we have today.
I want to come back to something that you said here in a second, but I want to pick up on, you mentioned AI's been around for a long time. It didn't really reach the ubiquitous of forefront of people's minds until ChatGPT. And it's so fascinating to me how one company with the right idea, with the right execution at the right time can just radically change the course of how things are done. And you think about it, it becomes It literally becomes how people even communicate about it, right? I mean, I made a joke recently in a meeting where I asked everybody, I was like, if I were to just tell you that I was going to have somebody drive me somewhere and not use my own car, what would I be doing? And everybody at the table immediately was like, oh, you'd be Ubering. It was like Uber completely changed how we even communicate about that. And same thing. Like, I mean, it's just so funny while I'll talk to people and they don't even say AI, right? If I'm just talking to a neighbor or a friend that maybe doesn't work in tech, they're like, oh yeah, ChatGPT, right? Because that's AI to them. And so it's interesting how just one big forward-facing movement can change everything. But you were talking about what I wanted to come back to was the concept of what really accelerated this was the cost of data storage. Because for AI to really offer a lot of the power that it brings, you've got to have the underlying data. And it's funny that you bring that up. You know, I'm not a technologist by trade. I'm not a computer science graduate like yourself. I'm usually the stupidest guy in the room when it comes to that kind of stuff. And it was funny. I have this brilliant guy on my team who's doing some really cool work for us. And one of the things that he was doing is building out a whole tool for our company to use and all of this. And he came to me yesterday, and this is just so funny how relevant it is. He came to me yesterday and he wants to do this project and he needed me to approve some budget for him for it. And I almost fell down laughing because he came and it was just funny how he prefaced it. He put it all together like the business case in a paragraph for me. And then we were on the phone talking about it. And he was like, yeah, I need this huge database to store all of this data and do all of this. And he's kind of setting it up like I'm expecting him to come to me and say he needs $1 million budget, or he's trying to give me all this good logic and reasoning why he needs this. And I was like, okay, how much is this thing going to cost? And he's like, I think about like $25 a year. And I just start laughing. And I was like, dude, are you really coming to me for approval for $25 a year? Like, this is hilarious. That was literally the amount of storage that he was need. And he was talking about massive amounts of data, right? I mean, the storage is so crazy cheap. Like, it's not really about the storage. Where the cost is going to come is in all the API calls for all of the different chat sessions that are going to happen. Like, that's where our cost is going to shift to. But you think about it, it wasn't that long ago where if he had come to me and asked for the storage that he needed, it would have been a very different story.
I think you're spot on there. I always say that it's only because data got cheaper, actually storage got cheaper, and you could store more and more data, that automatically the entire influx of everything that comes in. Today, I don't think anybody talks about data other than you might hear about data centers, these huge mammoth buildings that are being put together with racks and racks of servers that you would see. But it's been this timeline post-internet where we found this, it's almost like a hockey stick graph, right? Which has grown over time, the pre-2000, early 2000, 2010 to 15, and then 15 to 20, you would see these are significant eras in some way from a data standpoint and how that grows. An interesting segment that comes to mind is when I was attending the GTC for NVIDIA, Jensen made a wonderful comment. He talked about the pyramid of how AI looks into. And interestingly, the base of the pyramid today is not data, it's energy, right? So you have energy, you have infrastructure, and then it keeps going on all the way up on the top where you're leveraging data to work on these multiple APIs and applications and structures that is across industries that run. The understanding is data is ubiquitous. It is there, right? I mean, Economic Times long back somewhere said data is the new oil. I think it's gone way past that to some extent. The leverage of that has been because storage has gone cheaper over the years, and it's going to get more over time. I think eventually we are looking at an AI-based system where we are going to look at the intelligence that you get. So it's data to insights and insights to action. And that's where you drive the intelligence. And it's going to be the intelligence that you get per wattage of energy that we leverage. That's the new framework we are moving towards.
I have to apologize in advance. I really wish I could remember who posted this so I could give you credit. If you're listening and this was your post, please give me a hard time and I'll make sure to credit you for this. I want to say it was literally yesterday or super recently. I think somewhere in the Midwest, there were gunshots fired at like a governor's house, not directed at anyone, but just wanted to make the statement. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. But all that was left was a sign that said no data centers. And the post was really talking about one of the next kind of challenges in this whole world of AI is not even just the compute power or the technology. It's literally the land. And the fact that everybody wants more intelligence, they want better personalization in tech, they want all these things, but they don't want the data center in their backyard. And so politics is literally going to come into play of where are we going to place these things? How fast are we going to allow them to grow and take over? And yeah, it would be less about even just finding the energy or whatever it may be. It's literally just finding the land to put them that people are okay with giving up the land to put a big giant data center on. I thought that was interesting.
And Josh, if I may respond to that, see, the AI race is on, right? It's like the genie out of the bottle. You cannot put the genie back in. And so technology is almost like that, right? It's out of the bottle. There's no way for you to walk away from it. The only way to do this is to make sure you have the right guardrails. So that's where politics, that's where policies, that's where countries come into being to do that. But in true sense, the race is on, right? Whether it's US, it's China, it's Europe, it's Asia, India, the race is on, and every country in its right state would need to get on the bandwagon. They're already on that bandwagon, right? And you're trying to find out, and you would see many discussions across the board where there are billions and trillions being invested, but that's not the money that you see in right now. A lot of it is front-end investing for that matter, but you're right. It comes down to building these data centers, feeding them, the place that you put it, because end of the day, AI is only as smart as the data you feed it.
Yeah.
And as of today, right, you hear POCs everywhere. I think too many companies are serving it almost vending machine snacks when it really needs fine dining, right? And that is going to take its time to build it and give it so that it can start producing what it can produce.
I'm glad you came back to that because I wanted to talk about that, but I also want to just kind of put this out there that I want to come back to too. One of the things that I appreciated about talking to you earlier was, you also have kind of a global perspective of how this is being looked at. What were you telling me? You got to fly to Mexico City and then to Amsterdam and then to New York. And you made the comment that like across the world, everybody's having similar conversations and similar challenges, maybe with some different nuance with things like geography or with social norms of that country. But we're facing a lot of the same challenges. We're having a lot of the same conversations, right? So I want to kind of come back to what you're seeing from a global perspective. Just going back to, this was the big thing that I really wanted to talk to you about. It starts with the data, but it also starts with the kind of the process intelligence. And it really is. It's as simple as garbage in, garbage out. And, we see that even in some of my own ways of utilizing different AI tools, whether it's personal or professional. If the data set that I've got available to it is really weak, then what I'm going to get is really weak responses. I'll give you a great personal example. I started kind of having a conversation. It started in ChatGPT, and I recently migrated it over to Claude and found Claude was a lot better at it. Just about my own personal health and fitness. I gave it really weak data, and we were just having some conversations about it. And ultimately, the recommendations, the thoughts, it was pretty surface level, right? And then I moved it into a protected environment and uploaded a lot of data. Everything from blood work reports to connected it to my smart scale at home to all sorts of different things. And it was fascinating how good it got. Absolutely incredible. And some of the different things that we started to talk about. And it was such a black and white example of, I was expecting it to give me this revolutionary advice. without a lot of data to go off of. And then when I fed it great data, it actually got pretty impressive, right? And you see the same thing in our professional world too. You think about even just something as simple as like a credit union rolling out a knowledge base bot and having their frontline teller staff have an AI chatbot that's built for them where they can go in and query, hey, I've got a member who's asking about X. I need to know this about the product that we offer. If your data set isn't that great, then the response isn't going to be that great. And I think what's challenging is depending on where you fall in the spectrum of the organization, your own interactions with different AI tools, you may think that's gospel. The answer that you get out is great. And you're like, this is awesome. And it's totally off base because it just doesn't have the data set underneath to actually give you the appropriate response that, say, if you had gone and talked to somebody who'd been at the credit union for 25 years and asked them the same question, they would give you a far better response. So it does. It kind of all boils back to the data. And that's why you were saying that was where kind of the catalyst of this general utilization of AI, especially in business for specific use cases, comes down to, well, we got to the point where storage was so cheap, we could dump all the data in that what was coming out was actually meaningful.
So Josh, I'm so happy you ticked and tied this back to where we kind of started, right? Jim Bergson had said, data will talk if you're willing to listen. And I'll take the health piece that you put in Claude and you got the output. I'm going to take it as a broad, maybe an anecdote or a use case that I've seen in real life play out. In the healthcare ecosystem, typically, right, you have the payer, provider, patient, right? I say it's a virtuous and a vicious cycle. And it often feels in that ecosystem, these are three separate corners, right? Each holding data hostage in its own silos. So you have claims live with insurers, you have the clinical insights that's provided by the EHRs, you have the patient and the health records scattered across places. So we were working with one of the largest nonprofit insurers. And to give some context, this payer had around 2.5 million member households. Their entire ecosystem, starting from the CEO all the way down for them to take action, they had data in silos in different places. And think of it, the entire CXO suite had to take action looking at hundreds and hundreds of separate dashboards. So if you had to look at 50 dashboards and to come to a decision, that's not easy. That's very difficult. And you're looking at different metrics. You're looking at finance, claims, management, right? Just to give you some details. And each one of them was contradicting. So you need to go back and find the source of the data. Again, it was completely almost tribal knowledge. So when we started the discussion, I realized that the entire CXO suite, what they lacked, what they were having was death by dashboards. What they were lacking was one.
Sorry, but that needs to be a
t-shirt.
Death by dashboards.
They were lacking one source of truth, right? And we said, look, without much details, you need to make sure that your metrics are consistent. And most importantly, the people finally trust what they are seeing.
Yeah.
So we ran a project for them called Cortex. Eventually, they got the Mission and Vision Award for it. But ideally, what we wanted to do was the organization should have a single structure. And we took out all these hundreds and hundreds of dashboards they had and came down to a few that is enough for the CXO to take 80% of their decisions. And that was a huge win for them. And that's when they started realizing how important data is, right? And now that they started realizing the importance of data, and they found that there was a base that they could work with, they said, I want to leverage AI full throttle on top of this. And we said, okay, fair enough. If you want to leverage AI, let's understand where the core structure is. And the core structure, if you think of any pair, is, say, you or me, right? Josh is a member. I want to make sure I have an entire DNA for Josh and not the biological DNA, a data DNA for Josh. How can I build that? They started thinking through that. We started with around 600 member attributes, eventually went to thousands and more. But the whole idea was to give an X-ray vision. to make sure you can touch and feel all the data components together for Josh, just like your story in Claude. When you put in all the data in, it starts really working through. And it did, right? I'll give you an example where it did. Imagine a marketing or sales leader who wants to run a campaign for a specific demographic of people. Just say, wants to look at who's pre-diabetic or has a history of cardiac issues. And, he wants to go ahead and run this. It normally takes around 3 to 4 weeks before they can get the data. What we did was we started working to build this member DNA AI platform. And it came up where you can ask direct questions like, how many members are prescribed diabetes medication? Or how many members have total medication expenses above 100K? Again, getting this data, which took around 3 to 4 weeks across salespeople and the team and the clinical data and all of that together, this unification got it down to 48 hours. So you can put in a question and get that answer in 48 hours. It's very difficult in a broad ecosystem because you have so many siloed structure. So again, It speaks to the takeaway is when you unify data, when you embed AI deeply, you don't just make analytics better, you make the entire ecosystem better, right? I think that exactly speaks to what you saw in your personal space.
It really does start with the data and the data structure and what's being fed in terms of attributes, because one key metric missing can make all the difference in the value of the analysis that comes as an output, right? So take my personal example of the health and fitness thing. Let's say I go in there and I tell it that I'm 200 pounds, and it makes an assumption that I'm 6 feet tall. That's probably a reasonable weight for me, right? So maybe it's got some certain recommendations for that. What happens if I'm 4'9" or I'm 7 feet tall, right? Completely changes that equation. And so if that data point is missing and an assumption is made, we could be going down a totally incorrect path, right? Same thing goes for our business decisions. If I'm missing one critical piece of data, then the assumptions may be made on my behalf that are incorrect. And so there's a part is feeding in the right data, having the right data in the first place, and then having a process to identify is the correct data set being leveraged to make sure that my output is trustable.
That is an amazingly rich observation, Josh. I always feel when answers are cheap and abundant, good questions become the new scarcity. Yeah. And those are the right questions when we think across the data structure and platform. If I take this broadly across industries, right, and maybe let's go to financial services. Financial services has been an industry where technology has always been in the forefront. When we had the ATM machines started where you can dispense cash and, people don't need to go to branches. You had the drive-thrus built where you can put in your checks and the vacuum tubes. Financial services always has been in the forefront. However, the data in financial services, even in huge banks today, still sits in mainframes. Right? We are in a cloud era. There are only few banks that have moved completely to the cloud, but that data still sits in mainframes. So what happens is there is a huge silo in data structures. And that's where you see a huge difference between the traditional banks and the fintechs.
Yeah.
The fintechs are forward-looking. They have quicker formats, cloud data, leverage is faster. Whereas if you look at the traditional banks, it is slow-moving only because in the structure in which the data is. Now, that will change, and it is changing. But I think the important part also to notice from a financial services perspective is it is the most, I wouldn't say most, but yeah, to some extent, probably the most regulated industry, right, other than healthcare and life sciences. Mm-hmm. And because of the regulations, the need for data accuracy becomes important.
Yeah.
So the quality of the data, the lineage of the data. I remember when 2008, the market crashed, And post that, I was with a bank setting up Basel, CCAR, Dodd-Frank, all these various focus on risk programs. One of the analysts from SEC and an officer from Fed had asked me, we were doing this tier one, tier two capital calculations, and they said, can you take this calculation data back to the piece of paper? And that was a light bulb moment for me, because we massage the data so much, at least in financial services, till you come to the final outcome. It shows the importance of the lineage so that regulations can make sure that the data is correct and your outcome is correct. I think AI is probably the leverage of AI is going to be a bit more cautioned in financial services, only because you cannot have a black box where regulations are there. You have to be able to explain every piece and activity that is happening. So it's moving fast in some places and slow in the others. It needs to have a very strong foundation of data that is rightfully leveraged to get our outcomes in AI.
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes me think of something else that you were telling me that may at first kind of seem totally unrelated, but I think is really related to this topic. You were telling me you'd spent some time with GE and working on airplane jet engines. And you realized in that space that Six Sigma was not good enough. While that is a really high degree of quality control, in something like a jet engine, Six Sigma means we're losing lives. And that's a pretty big deal. And that we needed to get more to 11 Sigma to save lives. And while financial services may not be jet engines, and if a part fails, that thing falls out of the sky and we lose lives, and that's a really big deal. It is a highly regulated industry. And so we do have to be very cognizant of the quality control levels that we do. But at the same time, it's going to move really fast in some areas. It's going to move really slow in other areas. Can I put some words in your mouth? And I'd love to get your take on this. Where it's probably moving a lot slower are the areas where we need 11 Sigma. Where it can move a lot faster is the areas where Six Sigma will do just fine. Because in AI, if it gets it a little bit wrong in this area, it's not catastrophic. If it gets it a little bit wrong in this area, it's catastrophic. And I really feel for the highly regulated industries, because I think what it does a lot of times is that we apply everything has to be 11 Sigma. We can't get anything to 11 Sigma, so we're going to do nothing. And that's a bummer, because you're missing out on the opportunities where Six Sigma would have been just fine, and you can do it to that level today. And so you're missing out on potentially some operational efficiencies or some data intelligence that you could have gathered because we could have moved fast in this area. But that kind of overarching fear of regulatory compliance makes us take a pause. What are your thoughts?
And I'll answer it through a slightly different lens. Whenever I think of a solution, it always has two doors. It has the process door and it has the data door. Now, the process door always defines what the typical structured process would be and where you have non-value adds as part of the process and you run with. The data door helps you to define the outcomes. In financial services, as you rightly alluded, there are some areas, for example, the front end of reaching out to clients, the retail part of it, the marketing, all of that has much lesser segments for us to be able to leverage AI and work with it, right? But the moment we are getting into models, we are getting into fraud, you're looking at probability of defaults and loss given defaults. It's not that you do not use AI, it needs to be explainable AI, right? And that is very, very necessary. So to your point, regulations do slow us. They're necessary.
Yeah.
Don't hear me wrong. They are necessary. Yeah. They're absolutely necessary, at least at an age where the fraud leveraging AI can be really, really high. People can use that in many, many aspects to go ahead and do that, at least in anti-money laundering and focus areas of fraud analytics. That's why it's getting bigger and bigger by the day.
Yeah.
He had observed that computers were adept at tasks that humans considered complex, right? Like chess, math, etc. But they struggled to match the perception and motor skills of an infant that was born with billions of years of human evolution. Now, this is known as the Moravec's paradox, and it's extensively used in robotics, obviously more so being leveraged with AI today. But I think it could just as well be applied across industries and organizations, specifically financial services, as we drive to gain competitive edge. And thus, to address this scientist in a crib analogy, the change in behavior of leveraging the AI and leveraging analytics and data and AI as a good to have option towards almost now using AI as a product and analytics as a regular mission to work with, I think is absolutely critical for future growth of financial services and society as a whole.
Why do you think that?
Because if you position the amount of uncover that we can have in areas that we can reach out, so go back to digital transformation. If you look across the world, and don't look at first world countries, but look at across the world, you still have more than 30% people who do not have financial access. I think the leverage and use of data, AI, and technology can help this, and 30% is huge, right? You're looking at nearly 2.5 to 3 billion people across the world.
Yeah.
I think the leverage of that really helps this scientist in a crib analogy, right? That helps us to provide benefit in the broader ecosystem of society. And financial services is a key pillar, right? It is a key pillar in society. You did mention about credit unions. I think credit unions play an amazing role in the position of society, if you would, right, in some extent. And they have amazing focus in driving community work across the areas. It's a different thing that they may not have the breadth of spend as a large bank does, but there are many positives in which a credit union can start influencing society with the leverage of AI.
Yeah, that's a good point. I sit on the board of a small credit union. And actually, literally just last weekend, we had our annual strategic planning session with senior leadership. And we all get together in person for a full day session to kind of talk through things. And Parijat, I wish so many people could have just been a fly on the wall to hear the types of conversations. I mean, just hearing the types of things that come out of the mouth of the CEO of our credit union. I'm like, this is why I get excited about this industry. This is why I get passionate about this. Just to hear them talk about our business as a business. Look, let's just call it bluntly. The community financial services, credit unions in specific, are technically nonprofit. But if you don't make a profit, you got a business. You can't do the good that you're set out to do, right? So you have to stay a viable business. It's not about turning a profit, but you still have to be a profitable business. So to hear them talk about our business as a business, to hear them talk about our customers, the people that we get money from, as members, as people, as humans, not as numbers, as people. To hear our CEO talk about the different segments of people that he wants our credit union to serve and why, and where they need help and support, and they need someone in their corner when it comes to their financial lives. Man, I was fired up. I walked away from being locked inside for 10 hours on probably the first stunningly beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest, which was a little painful to be inside for. But I walked away from that going, man, that was a great use of my time. I felt so invigorated from that conversation. And that's a long way of saying I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the fabric of specifically the US economy is so closely tied to the work in the communities that community financial institutions do. And you said this earlier, right? AI absolutely is can be and should be a great equalizer. Because you're right. I mean, you just said, my little credit union, I know what our budget is, and it ain't what JP Morgan's is. Like, I think if we spent our entire assets under management, it's probably 1 month of Chase's just tech teams spend in their budget, right? So there's a little bit of a difference between us. But AI can be a really cool, great equalizer. But to your point, we have to have the data in place, and we've got to have the processes in place. Like, our team has to have a clear direction, vision, and understanding for how can we leverage AI. What's funny, I'll give you one really funny anecdote to that whole story. One of the reasons why I think our CEO asked me to be on the board years ago is, one, I represent their membership. I've been a member for almost 25 years. 2, I work in the industry. And 3, I come with kind of the technology background and experience. While I said I'm the stupidest guy in tech, I do work around it. So I learned a few things through osmosis, hopefully. But it was really funny. I took notes throughout the whole conversation. I also had my note taker running. And at the end of it, again, I ran this all through a protected environment. So my data stayed safe for it being segregated for being a part of the credit union. But I ran all of it through one of my Claude skills. And literally, I left the meeting. And as I was leaving the meeting, I dumped all of my notes and everything in. And I gave a very specific set of instructions to the skill earlier of how I wanted it to create an output for me. And I literally just hit run. And then I got in an Uber to head home. And from my phone, the skill finished running, created my output, and I sent everything to my CEO and CFO of the credit union. And on Monday, they both responded. They were like, holy smokes, these are the best notes we've ever seen. Like, this put my notes to shame. It was hilarious. And I was like, guys, like, I'm not going to take credit. This was Claude, right? But I said, hey, this is a great example of, hopefully you could tell that I was really hyper present in that meeting, right? I was listening to everything that my fellow board members were saying, the leadership team of the credit union was saying. I was really focused on that. I was really focused on listening and then solutioning out of the listening, but it didn't mean that my notes suffered. I was like, this is such a low-hanging fruit, simple example of how just think about your leadership team. And when the credit union is having meetings, how can you be more present? How can you listen to solution? Just a great example of that. So sorry, I threw probably like 7 different topics at you in that, but.
No, but first I have to say, Josh, you're a humble person. You have enough tech skills that you leverage in your day-to-day life.
I appreciate that.
The example you took is a very, very powerful example, at least from when you look at credit unions, as you rightly said. They don't have the biggest budgets. They don't have the broadest reach. They don't have a massive PR operations, brand recognition. But I think there's also a sense of a perception problem here, right? When you think of AI, part of AI is also the generative engine optimization, or GEO, as we call it. And it does not work the traditional digital marketing way. It works slightly differently. AI systems, they kind of measure volume, they measure trust. There's some sort of evaluation that is done. And interestingly, a lot of these are qualities that are built in the community institutions, right? Or they've been cultivating for decades. So there are advantages, I think, that a credit union or similar has, primarily when these searches come up. So if I go ahead in a particular community and I start searching the kind of things I need, and I leverage AI to do that search, just like you used it to do your notes. But if I start doing that for my search and I give specific instructions, it's natural that it'll come up beyond the PR budget, because some of the advantages are like there's an authentic community authority, right? When these AI systems evaluate and they look around, they would see there are community banks and there are credit unions that work for decades, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, right? And you have sponsors and you have local events and you have partners and there are school districts. All of that play in. And so when a consumer like me or you or somebody else is going to ask an AI assistant for financial services in that area, the system looks and corroborates all these signals, and then automatically that local presence comes up, and so automatically that comes up as a choice. So I think what has happened over the ages, if that is digitized and that's available in the broad ecosystem of the internet, it is actually an advantage for AI systems to start building up when consumers start looking for it.
If you work for a credit union or a community bank, GEO is absolutely essential right now. A shout out to Andrew Downen, the CEO of OB Credit Union in Olympia, Washington. I sat in on a presentation that he gave in Vegas last year to a group of credit union executives and board members. And it was really funny. He started his whole pitch with, he was like, the second I touched down here in Vegas, he's like, I literally just went to ChatGPT, gave it a few parameters about me, and said, go find me the lowest CD rate. Or sorry, the highest CD rate, rather, that I could apply for here in Las Vegas, right? And it gave him a bunch of examples. And he was like, gang, the days of winning over a slightly better rate are over. I can go to ChatGPT and everything is just at my fingertips, and it can do really intelligent analysis of the market of products and solutions that are out there, the rates that are out there, what I would and would not qualify for. And then couple that with everybody's been doing this whole arms race of making it easier to digitally become a, account holder of a financial institution or procure a product or service from them. So now it's super easy for ChatGPT to be like, actually, Chime's got a great rate, and here, let me dump you into their account opening workflow, and you can go open that account. His point was, we have to be a lot more thoughtful about GEO. And we need to make sure that our unique value prop and our differentiation shines through in that. And you've got to be different. And so the piece of advice that I would give folks is, it's really this simple, okay? Go pull up your chat engine of choice, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatever it may be. Literally go in there and just say, hey, I work at this credit union. Go tell me, what is your perception of us now? Where do we rank highly? Where do we fall short? Who do you see as my main competitors? Who would you pitch against me? Start having a conversation. And then the real power is to go in and just say, okay, I want to influence you. I want you to rank me higher. What do I need to do? And it'll tell you, hey, you need to do more, whatever, thought leadership on your blog that I can pull. And to your point from earlier, Parijat, see you as a thought leader, right? And elevate that up in my search results. And it'll give you a clear picture of here's where you rank today. Here's what you can improve, and here's how you can improve it, and help you with the strategies to actually improve it, right? So use the tool to help you use the tool.
I think you're spot on with that. And I think in addition to that, the other great comment would be, at least from a credit union and a community bank perspective, is the trust that has grown over time in the community. And all of that needs to show up, right? Trust is a huge lever, at least in the GEO world that you laid down, Josh. So I think making sure that credit unions and community banks can use the trust network will be really important.
Well, and that kind of brings us full circle to one of the things that you started with. I feel like one of your hopes is that things like technology and the next evolution of whatever our next industrial revolution is that it actually allows humans to just be more human and brings that more to the forefront. I've probably overused the example, but think about the advent of the telephone, right? And just how incredibly connected that made us as humans. And so, yes, that was technology. Yes, that was business. That brought about the eventual smartphone and the garbage of social media. And that's a topic for another day. But it made us more connected, right? It made it so that my little brother who lives in Chattanooga, I just pick up the phone and call him and catch up, which I probably should do more of, and say, how are you doing? and it made us more connected, right? Where that didn't exist before. And so, again, we've had all sorts of conversations about AI, and there's absolutely pros and cons, right? And there's definitely things that I can find about it that I don't love. There's things about the Industrial Revolution I can look back and say, I don't love. Look at the pollution. Look at what it did to other elements of just our world and our society. But look at all the good that it did too. Same thing with AI. We were talking about the energy consumption. We were talking about the land requirements for the data centers and all of those things. We can also absolutely look at it as a tool that kills off creativity or kills off doing research and really thought-provoking. But it can also help with those two things too, if we use it from that lens. So I think it's an interesting place that we're in, where people are trying to find ways to leverage it for the good and actually be more human rather than less human. I think people are still trying to figure that out.
And the way I would like to round up your comment here is there's a concept called Jevons paradox. And what it talks about is any change in technology. So when you think we had the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of pushback, primarily because people will lose jobs. But what happened eventually was the job market completely expanded. The reason it expanded was what Industrial Revolution gave us was took away the grunt work that people can start to look at the next value in that position. The same happened with technology, as you rightly said. When technology came in, initial pushback, I still remember places and cities and countries where when the first PC was shipped in, they were just considered as job killers and they were burnt down. The entire warehouse was burned down. If you see today, it has provided more jobs than the Industrial Revolution can ever think of. I think Jevons paradox plays out even with the future technologies that come, right? And obviously, there is a sense of fear. There is a sense of unknowing, and anything that we do not know, we fear. So obviously, that's the chasm, if you would, on how do we use this new technology. But I would like to, kind of close this wonderful conversation that we are having with a quote, if I may, from Scott Fitzgerald. That's always been very close to me. It goes like this: true intelligence is the ability to hold competing ideas in your mind and still work effectively. I'll say it once again. True intelligence is the ability to hold competing ideas in your mind and still work effectively. I believe that is the truth of today's existence.
I like that too. I think that's something that I've tried to embody more and more as I've gotten older, is the idea and the concept that competing ideas make me better, right? I'm a huge fan of whatever the topic may be. I love to look at competing ideas, especially something that I'm really dead set on or passionate about, because I might be missing something really obvious, right? And I love to talk to people who disagree with me, because, man, if you can change my mind, that's pretty impressive. And that's good for me. And so, look, again, we can take the pessimistic view, but it feels like so many times, especially if you're looking on social media, goodness gracious, it just feels like we're incapable of that anymore, right? We're incapable of having competing ideas in our head. And I'm so focused on the ideology of one camp or another, and we don't let those competing ideas in. And I would argue that's one of the things that makes the human race so great, is diversity, is having different points of view, having different ideas, bringing them to the table and listening to them. I don't know how this ties back into what role AI plays in that, but I think you can look at AI from a positive or a pessimistic sense. And I think if you talk to 10 people, you can probably get a lot of different competing ideas around the role that it's going to play or the impact that it's going to have. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of negative. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, but I like to focus on the positive.
Yeah, and to your comment, I think it is good to have competing ideas, only because you do not have a single form to align and adhere with to some extent. Every new technology needs to be challenged, and that's what's happening right now in its way and form. But I'll bring it back to where we started, right? It goes back to what are the solutions that we are trying to drive for humanity? What are the solutions that we are trying to drive for communities? What are the solutions that we are trying to drive for our families, right?
Yeah.
So it's the family is the microcosm, the country and the world is the macrocosm, right? But as you keep building solutions, it should affect you and your family, and it should eventually affect the community, the society, the state, the country, the world in its larger form. And if we can get this trajectory, I think fear is good because it keeps us on the right guardrails and makes us ask the right questions.
Yeah.
But I am equally optimistic in the usage of this technology because this has so much to offer and so much for humans to even get into the next value-based activity, if you would, where you can, again, going back to where we started, look at you in the face and listen to you. I can give you my total attention. I can make sure that the best gift I give you is my attention, and vice versa. Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic where this might land.
Yeah, I like that approach. And I think that was one of the things that really drew me to the conversation with you is just that concept, right? Of how can we leverage technology and everything that's come before it and is going to come after it to be better humans. And I know that sounds really like pie in the sky ethereal, but I think that's a good guiding light. I would be remiss if I didn't come back to one thing that we touched on earlier before I let you go, though. You said you get to see kind of a global view of this. What you find fascinating is that while we all have different diverse lenses that we're looking at it through, some of the challenges and opportunities are common. Any kind of parting thoughts on that topic?
I think going back to my comment on looking at any problem statement through a process and a data door, when you start looking at that, the challenges are very, very common across the board, right? When you lay out the process. For example, the issue of fraud that we see in the US is equivalent in LATAM, is also very similar when I do the discussion in Amsterdam. Right? The data rules are different. There might be separate rules that Europe uses versus US versus LATAM and areas like that, ratio. But the problem statement is very similar, right? So the solutions that we build, if we build it with slightly broader scope, can be applicable across the board, right? And we can help solve those problems. Some are very narrow and specific in that you may not be. Europe, as you understand, every country has its own rules and norms and structures, so it plays very differently than it would in US or Asia Pacific. But I think the problem statements are very common. More importantly, because we are focused a bit on financial services being the pillar of society, the needs and the ask from people across the world are very similar. I should be able to access, I should be able to get access and use financial services, I should be able to get money, and I should be able to drive something for myself and the community that I'm trying to build, or the country at large. When you start solving the problems across the board, the problems will be specific. It's going to be a very different problem what you want to solve in Bangalore versus what you want to solve in Amsterdam versus what you want to solve in Mexico City, only because the societal structure is slightly different. But the solution of it and the final impact of it is pretty much the same.
It may sound silly, but you can boil it down to financial services. Money is a big part of our society, no matter where you live. And being able to access it when, where, why, how you want, and do what you want with it when you want it. It's kind of the crux of it all, right? Yep. So we're all trying to solve that problem and offer a value add within that stream. Parijat, before I let you go, I got two final questions for you. So one, where do you go for information? How do you stay up to date on what's happening in the world?
That's a difficult question because I obviously go through multiple reads and write-ups and blog posts and podcasts without naming anything specific. But I think my biggest information comes from practitioners. I spend more than 2/3 of the year talking to people across the board, people like you, people who are industry practitioners, people who are in the system, working the system, finding the issues, and they are cribbing about it, right? I think that is where my information comes in. And it's a wonderful spectrum. I have people who are amazingly optimistic with the solution that they have. And interestingly, that same solution is completely shut down on the other part of the world. But that is the interesting part, right? Because that's where I get to feel and understand the value add that moves across in different paths. So I think that is very interesting to me when I keep talking to people across the board. Coming back to, again, the factor of listening, I love to listen. I would like to hear what your problem statement is, and I would like to then figure out the solution and structure for it. That's been my core mantra.
I mean, I feel like I should have known what your answer would be given this whole episode, and that your answer would be just talking to people. So that's funny. Last but not least, if people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about your organization and what you're doing, how can they connect with you and learn more?
So the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. That's probably the only social media platform that I'm on, other than the Forbes platform. And the company I'm part of is LatentView Analytics, which is a pure play data first organization, 20 years, more than 2 decades in that area. And we work across 4 big verticals. Anybody wants to know more about LatentView, it's the website. That should be good, other than LinkedIn and other social media. We are pretty much in every other social media structures. That'll be a good place for anybody who wants to learn more about LatentView Analytics as an organization.
Parijat, it's been absolutely a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for providing your unique perspective and ideas. And thanks for all the different kind of analogies and callbacks to different things people have said and done. I thought that was pretty cool. But thank you again just so much for coming and being a guest on the Digital Banking Podcast and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Josh. It was wonderful to have this discussion with you. Loved it. It was warm, and hope to come back again. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast, powered by Tyfone. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.